Marilyn Doobie here. Oh, what's the play for today? Today, it's art journaling. And I'm going to be starting with a completely blank page. Now, I've been told by several people recently that the blank page was really intimidating to them. And I want to take some of that intimidation out for you because it's just paper. And I'm going to use a gel plate, and actually the cleanup part of it is actually going to get it started. Because once you get some stuff on there, then the page just gets rolling. Along the way, I'm also going to be using a big rubber stamp in there and some stencils. And I'm going to bring in the Mousse. Now, when I say the Mousse, I don't mean the kind of mousse that walks around the woods, and I don't mean the kind of mousse you serve for dessert, and I definitely do not mean the kind of mousse that you put in your hair. This is a mixed media mousse, and it's great for adding some texture because of how it grabs the color. Well, you'll see how that all works on one of the later layers on the journal. So I've got a blank art journal page there, and I'm going to use my gel plate to fill it up with color, but I'm going to also fill it up with the brayer. That way, not a drop of paint is going to get wasted. It's all going to go towards building up layers for the pages. As I clean the brayer off on the page, this is serious willy-nilly, just anywhere that there's space to put it. It's just about getting a background layer built on here. We're going to put more on there with the plate, but this is going to get the page warmed up, get the first layers of color started. Now I've got 3 colors on the plate, and that would make a nice print just the way it is. But I want to add a little texture to it. The piece that I'm using here, this is a piece of textured wallpaper that I've got. You could use anything that has texture in it. If you've got embossing folders, just emboss some paper and use that to do the same thing. Got a piece of corrugated cardboard? Do the exact same thing. Got some bubble wrap? Same thing. You've got the idea that anything that has texture you can use this way. I'm pushing it in there, putting that texture in the paint, and I'm just going all around this plate, getting that color moved around, getting that texture into it. Now I'm going to flip this plate over and put it directly onto that art journal page. There's no precision in this, it's just kind of plopping it down there. I didn't even get it lined up very carefully. The plate is smaller than the page, not going to be a problem. I can even drop the plate like that, and guess what? It's still going to work. Now there's enough paint on here to get a ghost print or a second one, so I'm going to keep putting this on here until all the paint is off of the plate. So what about that gap on the bottom left? Is that going to be a problem where the plate was smaller than the page? No, not at all. You're going to see how I handle that later in the video. I want to put this giant stamp that I carved onto the art journal page. And to get it inked up with paint, I'm going to use the gel plate to help me with that too, because this is going to become the palette where I can spread the paint nice and evenly and treat it as if it's a great big ink pad for this rubber stamp. And just like if you had an ink pad that was smaller than a stamp, you're just going to put the stamp on it in one area and then put the other part onto the ink pad. That's what I did here for this. That way I can get that paint all over the image. Now, if you're curious about how to carve large stamps like this, I've got a video that I'll have the link down below, or maybe it'll pop up on screen that'll take you right to it so you can see the process for how I go about doing this. So I've got paint all over that stamp, and now I'm going to position it right on the page where I want it. Just like you do with a smaller rubber stamp, or if the rubber stamp had been on a regular ink pad, you just push it down to make sure you've got contact, and then you lift up the stamp and you have your image. I really like using black paint with stamps because it allows me to have a much bolder, darker image. But now I've got all this paint left over on the plate. What am I going to do with that? Well, guess what? I'm going to make some gel prints with it. As long as I've got it all there, I might as well use it, right? And that's why I like to use the gel plate as my palette, because I don't end up wasting anything at all. So I've stamped that half off of it. I dipped it in the paint, and then I put the image onto the gel plate. And when I lift up this print, this first print that I'm going to get, well, it's not one that's going to rock my world. That happens sometimes. It's okay, but it's not making me nearly as happy as what the ghost print's going to do. But that print that I don't love yet, I'm going to keep that because I know that that can become one that I love. I'm going to build those layers on it. I'm going to keep adding more to it. And the process for how I go about doing that, that's something that I go into detail with inside the workshop Gel Printing Fundamentals. And that workshop is all about getting the most out of your gel plate by understanding how to get the looks that you love with it. Now that workshop is self-paced and completely downloadable, so check out the link below to find out more details about gel printing fundamentals. As I was building the layers up on this page and using the white paint to block out or cover up a bunch of the background and let what was underneath the stamp really shine, I realized I had a problem. And the problem was I really love part of that background. So much so I couldn't bring myself to put that white paint over it. But guess what? This is an art journal page. If I don't want to cover up something, I don't have to cover it up. So I didn't cover all of it up. I kept some of it and I covered up some of it. Remember that bottom part of the page where the gel plate was smaller than the page? That's all now completely covered up. I'm going to do some more covering up too. I took the stamp and I cut out a piece of paper in its exact shape. That way I could put it on top of my stamped image and it's going to act as a mask and protect that because I want to do some stenciling on top here and I don't want to have to be precise about what I'm doing. I want it to look like the stenciling is hidden behind the cathedral window and not something that I did after I stamped it. The stencil that I'm using here is called Rembrandt's Words, and it's one I designed for over at StencilGirl Products. And yep, you bet, I'll have a full supply list over on the blog. Should be a link popping up or down below that'll take you right over to it. So what is this stuff that I'm putting through the stencil right now? Well, this stuff is called Mousse. It's from Marabou, and think of it as this wonderful, gritty, got a grain to it, it's got some texture, it's got some tooth to it, and it's also thick. And I'm just putting it in this stencil. As I'm spreading it around, getting it in there, I'm not worrying about making everything perfect with this because I'm going to go for an aged look with this by the time it's done, so perfection is not necessary. One of the reasons why I like this stuff is it gives me some texture and it dries reasonably quickly. So what does reasonably quickly mean? Well, there's no exact time to it, but when I compare it to other things that I will use that are thick and give me texture, this one actually dries very quickly compared to some of the others. So it's relative to other supplies. It does take it a few minutes to dry, and yeah, if you hit it with a heat gun, it does go faster. Those of you living in Arizona or those really dry, warm places, you probably don't have to wait very long for it at all. Now wait a minute, I lift up the stencil and you can barely see it. What's going on there? Well, that's because if you put something white on top of something white, it's a lot harder to see it. But don't worry, I'm not stopping here. We'll see it before too long. But that texture's there, but right now, no, it is hard to see. If I go and do it over the colorful part of the page, it's much easier to see that pattern in there. Hey, and just a heads up, when you use something like Mousse with a stencil, this is one of the few times that I do promptly clean off my stencil when I'm finished because I don't want this to dry on the stencil. You can wipe off the stencil with a baby wipe really well, or if you've got a tray of water, you can put it in that to soak, and as long as it's in water, then you can come back to it a little bit later and finish cleaning it off. It's been about 20-30 minutes and the mousse is now completely dry. I took off the paper that was protecting the stamped image and I'm taking art crayons and just scribbling on top of where that mousse is. I'm getting some of the color on there and the color really snags on top of that mousse because it's got a grit or a texture to it. It's a fine texture, but it's plenty to grab those art supplies. The very, very fancy tool, the baby wipe there in my hand, I am spreading that color around and you can see how it's snagging or getting stuck on where that stenciling was. That's the cool thing about the mousse is it really grabs that color. And you have the flexibility and freedom if you're putting it on and you realize, wow, I want to take some of the color off, you bring in the baby wipe. If you want to put more color on it, you bring the art crayon back in there and you add more color to it. Clearly, I'm in a more color kind of mood, so I'm putting a whole bunch on there. Do you have to use a baby wipe to spread it around? No. See here, I'm using my hand to spread it. You can use a paper towel, a Kleenex, your hand, a baby wipe, whatever you've got within arm's reach to spread this around. Well, let me qualify that. Not anything within arm's reach, because right now, my dog is within arm's reach, and I probably wouldn't use him to do this. He probably wouldn't appreciate it since this isn't bacon, and that pretty much seems to be about the only thing he's appreciating today. Now, I mentioned that I was all about the color today. I love that color up there, but I want even more of it. So I am just going to go right over that painted area with more of that art crayon. When you first put the art crayon onto your art journal page or whatever else you're working with it on, it's very creamy, it's very easy to blend. You've seen me do it with my hands in this, you've seen me do it with baby wipes. However you want to blend it, it's just very creamy and easy to work with. But here's the thing, and this is part of the reason why I'm really falling in love with the art crayons, is because if I give them a couple of hours to set up, they won't be nearly as creamy. In fact, after they've set up, they'll have a matte feeling to them. So that makes it easier if I want to write on them, say with colored pencils, because right now I can't write on them with colored pencils very well because they've got more of that creamy feeling. But once they've set up and they've got that matte feeling, then I can easily write over them with those colored pencils. So while I'm waiting for those to set up, I think I might just go off and start doing a little more gel printing. So next time you're facing a blank page in your journal and you're not sure what to do with it, you know to bring out that gel plate, get that background on there, clean that brayer off right on the page, and get that page going. Now, if you'd like more ideas for how to use your gel plate, different things that you can do with it, how you can play with the entire rainbow and never make mud with it, how you can get textures and patterns and all those intricate details in one pull, then check out my workshop, Gel Printing Fundamentals. Thanks so much for joining me for today's play, and thank you for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.